Okay, let's unpack this.
Right.
Today, we are diving deep into what is, I think, maybe the most intense and singular document we've ever looked at.
I'd have to agree. This isn't just a story or record of events. It feels more like a declaration of war against what the author sees as systemic deception.
Absolutely. Our source material is this one personal testimony. It was written in 2021, and it details a 15-year ordeal.
15 years,
Yeah.
from 2005 to 2020, and it's all focused on what he calls medical exploitation.
But it's so much more than that. It's this massive document, and it goes way beyond a single case of malpractice.
It really does. The author uses his own personal trauma as a jumping-off point.
Yeah?
And from there, he tries to expose what he views as this vast, coordinated system of deceit,
A system that runs from what? One single doctor's office?
all the way up to global institutions
Yeah.
and even our technological infrastructure. It's an incredible scope.
So the mission for this deep dive is, I think, really crucial for you, the learner. This testimony it's dense, it's overwhelming, and frankly, it's highly charged.
It is. So our goal here is to give you a shortcut to the key insights.
Exactly. We want to pull out the specific allegations he makes about medical ethics, about compromised trust, and the really shocking conclusions he draws about these hidden realities.
We're basically extracting the nuggets of information that reveal the architecture of his skepticism, how he built this worldview.
And that shock factor, it's built right into the framing of the source, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. From the very first line, the author says that the density, the weight of his 15 years of suffering, it's equivalent to the time it takes you to read every single word on the page.
It's such a powerful way to frame it. He's setting the magnitude of the experience immediately. He's demanding that you, the listener, understand this isn't just a story. It's a life-altering event distilled into a warning.
And that warning really centers on one powerful, almost mythic concept, the recognition of the Dajjal.
The Dajjal. For anyone who doesn't know, that means the imposter or the ultimate deceiver.
Right. But the source defines it in these really modern, functional terms. For him, the Dajjal is someone who knows a person's weaknesses, exploits them ruthlessly, and then uses illusion or subtle deception to harm you without you even knowing it.
And this is such a critical piece of framing. We're looking at a narrative written from the perspective that the world, especially the world of professional expertise, isn't just flawed.
No, it's actively, maliciously working against the individual, using these sophisticated, hidden methods of deceit. His story is meant to be a kind of blueprint for recognizing these modern deceivers in every single field.
So with that in mind, let's jump straight into the timeline. Section 1 is all about the personal medical ordeal, those 15 years, and the highly questionable, almost ritualistic interactions that convinced him he was the victim of a calculated plot.
The vortex, as he calls it, began in 2005. The path to this doctor, a neurologist and psychiatrist, was initiated by a close friend of the patient's mother.
And the source includes these seemingly minor, almost domestic details that when he looks back, he sees them as damning.
Totally. Like after making the referral, this friend apparently rarely entered the house ever again. And then later, he finds out she started a charity association.
The implication there for the author is that this isn't just a coincidence.
Not at all. He connects these faint threads, suggesting this early, subtle link between his individual medical path and these broader, potentially corrupt networks.
Networks involving finance, organized influence, symbolized by her quick move into a public charity role.
Right. And then comes the initial visit. This is what the source calls the psychological trick.
The doctor opens the very first consultation, the very first meeting, with this incredibly suggestive leading question.
He asks him, do you feel people are watching and talking about you?
Wow. And what's fascinating is how the author reflects on that moment. He felt the doctor was so manipulative, so skilled in deception, that basically any emotionally charged question would have resulted in a yes.
He was convinced. He believes the doctor wasn't trying to diagnose him. He was trying to establish proof of illness on the spot.
This is the critical juncture, then. The source argues that his emotions, which he says were just simple anxiety and fear, should have been treated with, positive psychological guidance, not heavy drugs.
But by asking that one leading question, the doctor successfully convinces him he's seriously ill. He used psychological leverage, not clinical evidence.
And that single moment, that initial yes, is what plunges him into this 15-year vortex of treatment.
All of it sustained by huge, constant quantities of medication.
And once he was in that vortex, the practices, according to his account, just got more and more bizarre, unconventional. You said almost ritualistic.
I did.
Yeah.
A key example he gives is the stethoscope. The doctor consistently insisted on using an internal medicine stethoscope on his chest, but in a very specific, very unusual spot,
Where was it?
about 5 to 6 centimeters above the heart center.
That's not standard practice.
Not at all. And the doctor's stated reason was to check his pulse, measure his pressure, and, quote, make sure a stroke was not imminent.
But for a neurologist or psychiatrist, that's highly unusual.
Extremely. The source felt that this consistent, odd placement was just part of the theater of deception. It was reinforcing this idea that he had some complex, hidden, physical problem that only this specific doctor could monitor.
And there was another strange tool, right? The hammer test.
Yes, the hammer test. The doctor repeatedly used a hammer-like tool to tap or strike his joints, his wrist, his elbow, his knee, during almost every single visit.
And when the patient asked why, what was the reason for this?
The doctor consistently, and the source says explicitly, evaded giving a straight answer.
So that evasion is a huge part of the narrative here.
It's key. It wasn't just a physical ritual, it was a rhetorical one. Instead of giving a medical explanation, the doctor would substitute it with a prediction.
A prediction.
He claimed the patient's illness would miraculously disappear when he reached the age of 33.
Wait, hold on. That sounds less like medicine and more like a psychic reading.
Or like setting a psychological timer.
Right. So what purpose does that detail, that specific age prediction, serve in his narrative of deception?
Oh, it's massive. The source now believes it was a calculated strategy to keep him dependent.
So if you have a date for recovery set way off in the future.
It guarantees you'll keep coming back, keep paying, until you hit that milestone. It wasn't a cure. It was an artificial expiration date on the treatment itself, designed to ensure long-term revenue.
Speaking of revenue, let's get into the financial details, because the source links them directly to his suspicion of collusion.
He does. He mentions his family is middle income. And initially, he was prescribed Abilify. The doctor allegedly told him it was because it was cheap.
Okay.
But as the years went on, the doctor started steering him to one very specific pharmacy. He kept insisting the medicine there was inexpensive.
And looking back, the source sees this as a clear signal.
A clear partnership. He concluded that if a specific doctor is sending you to a specific pharmacy for a supposedly cheap drug, it's a huge indicator of collusion.
And he thinks it's likely about dispensing counterfeit or adulterated drugs.
Exactly. To ensure dependency and maximize profit for both the doctor and the pharmacy.
This systematic, unchallenged flow of medication goes on until June 2020. This is the big turning point, the moment of revelation.
After 15 years of taking this drug every single day.
He finally sits down and meticulously reads the leaflet that comes with the primary drug, Abilify.
And this is where his claims shift from just suspicion to absolute conviction.
What did he find?
He discovered that a staggering 90% of the symptoms the drug was designed to treat, the actual serious psychological maladies, were not present in his case.
So he realized he'd been treated for phantom illnesses for a decade and a half.
For 15 years. But the side effects? They were terrifyingly real.
And he documented them.
Meticulously. He devoted a lot of time to matching his negative effects point by point to the leaflet's warnings.
What were there?
It was a whole cocktail. Severe thirst, relentless fatigue, constant hunger, increased sweating, substantial weight gain, difficulty swallowing. He mentioned occasional vomiting in the past, a persistent mild headache, general anxiety.
And the heartbeat thing.
And crucially, yes, a constantly rapid heartbeat that he could physically feel throbbing in his ear.
He presents this list as the physical proof, the evidence of the poison that had built up.
Yes, and he contrasts this with his description of his actual symptoms before all the treatment started.
Which were?
Basic anxiety and fear. He said it caused some irregular thinking, speech, and concentration, which led to some involuntary movement and frowning. He attributed it all to minor, easily solved fear, not a severe psychological disorder that needed this heavy regimen.
So the ultimate test of the doctor's good faith came when he contacted him.
Right. The patient sends this long, detailed WhatsApp message. He lays out the severe discrepancy between his actual mild symptoms and the powerful drug's intended use. And he specifically asks for a change in medication to address his lifelong fear and panic attacks.
And the doctor's reply?
It was terse. He just prescribed Myrtamash, which is a common antidepressant.
Even though the patient had just said he wasn't depressed.
Exactly. For the source, this was the final proof. The doctor wasn't interested in treating the root cause or listening to him. He was just trying to maintain the psychological coma and keep the flow of drugs going, what he now calls the poison.
So if you, the listener, had suffered these acute, documented physical side effects for 15 years, only to find out the cure was for an illness you didn't even have, how much trust would you have left in any authority system?
None. And that emotional core is what drives the entire rest of the document.
Right.
It leads us right into the immediate aftermath and how the system reacted when he challenged it.
Okay, so that brings us to section 2. This covers the period right after he challenges his original doctor.
Yeah, and it focuses on two key things. A surprising realization he has about a subtle improvement, and then the reactions of other medical professionals when he tells them this whole detailed story of deception.
Let's start with the improvement. It only became clear to him in retrospect, right?
Years later, exactly. He'd been employed since 2010, and in 2018, he started getting his medication through his work's pharmacy. It was state supplied.
But he didn't notice the significance at the time.
No, not immediately.
Hmm.
It wasn't until February 2021 that he connected the dots. He realized several of his debilitating issues, the constant headache, the severe fatigue, even his blood pressure, had all gradually vanished since 2018.
So the key insight for him is the alleged change in the quality of the drug.
Absolutely. For the author, that improvement was directly attributable to the different state-supplied source of the medication. It confirmed his deep-seated belief that the original drugs from the colluding pharmacy had been adulterated or counterfeit.
Designed to maximize the side effects while masking his true, mild symptoms.
Precisely. And this realization also gave him the answer to the most persistent mystery of the whole 15 years. The hammer test.
Right. The tapping on the joints.
The patient concluded that the hammer-like tool was being used to check if his joints, his wrist, elbow, and knee had been destroyed yet by the toxic counterfeit drugs.
Wow. So he believes the doctor was actively monitoring the physical destruction caused by the very regimen he prescribed.
That's his conclusion. He links it back to a specific memory of feeling joint weakness in the clinic.
The source also includes a very specific cultural observation about the original doctor, which he uses to characterize what he calls the Dajjal's nature.
He does. It's very detailed. Over those 15 years, he says, the doctor was only ever seen performing the afternoon prayer, and he always did it just before Maghrib, the sunset prayer.
And we should probably give a little context here for the listener. For someone familiar with Islamic practice, performing the afternoon prayer that late, right before the next prayer time starts, is often seen as, well, cutting it very close.
It's seen as bordering on negligence. The source uses this precise timing, plus the fact that the doctor allegedly took more time than necessary and was always ready, always abluted. He uses it all to suggest a kind of religious hypocrisy, a subtle signpost of the doctor's true, corrupt nature that a person of authority would immediately pick up on.
So, armed with this detailed, shocking realization, he goes out and seeks second opinions.
He does. He presents his entire story to two other neurologists, who he just calls Dr. 1 and Dr. 2, and their reactions just solidified his view of a systemic problem.
What was Dr. 1's reaction?
His initial reaction was to immediately defend the original doctor, the Dajjal. He insisted the method of treatment was very normal,
He said any doctor would have done the same thing.
which, for the source, just confirmed his suspicion that there was this professional protective circle around the first doctor.
Did Dr. 1 prescribe anything?
He did, eventually. New medications to treat the core anxiety and OCD, Surpass and Statimin. The source found Surpass was extremely effective. He said his symptoms vanished in 2 days.
But there was side effect.
A severe one, difficulty with ejaculation. So he stopped taking this Surpass, but continued with the Statimin, which was less potent but still helped.
So what happened when he reported this side effect? It's a pretty common one with these kinds of drugs.
Dr. 1 confirmed it was correct, but then he prescribed a sexual stimulant. And crucially, the stimulant was totally ineffective when taken with the anti-anxiety drugs.
So instead of finding an alternative treatment,
He just insisted there were no other alternatives. The source viewed this as another maneuver to force him back into a debilitating or unsatisfactory drug regimen.
and then there was that strange incident of what he calls deliberate labeling.
Yes. During a visit in 2020, Dr. 1 started addressing him as Sheik.
But the source points out he wasn't visibly religious at the time. No beard or anything like that.
Right. So he concluded this was a deliberate act, labeling him, maybe to categorize him as unstable or overly religious within their shared deceptive network.
And what about Dr. Tu, the second neurologist?
He also tried to justify the Dajal's 15 years of treatment. He suggested the original doctor might have just imagined the illness was more severe than it was. He used the term kabis.
A term the source didn't even understand.
Right. It means a severe psychological breakdown. So the source is left wondering how any professional could spend 15 years diagnosing based on fantasy instead of precision.
And there was something suspicious about how both doctors responded to his story, wasn't there?
Very. He sent the full, complex 15-year narrative to both of them via WhatsApp, and he says they both responded faster than lightning.
He took that unusual speed to mean they had pre-coordinated their defense strategy, or were already alerted about his complaint.
Exactly. And the collusion narrative just gained more momentum when the patient told Dr. Tu he was thinking of filing a complaint with the Ministry of Interior.
What happened then?
Dr. Tu immediately dropped the defense and advised an urgent referral to a psychiatrist. Justification, followed by a rapid referral as soon as a legal threat was made. It just cemented the source's view of a systemic cover-up.
The final piece of this puzzle was the work psychiatrist.
The first doctor he saw after leaving the original Dajjal, this psychiatrist diagnosed him with acute depression and OCD.
And prescribed a heavy antidepressant regimen, even though the patient kept saying he didn't feel depressed, just anxious and fearful.
Right, the source felt completely trapped. He concluded he was being tossed like a ball on the field between this group of deceivers who were exploiting his weakness and his ignorance.
He lists all these heavy drugs he was on over the years. Risperdal, Invega, Abilify, and says they all contributed to him feeling like an automaton or semi-dead person.
Which speaks to this culture of normalized illness he kept witnessing. He tells this one story about needing a sick leave certificate, and the psychiatrist refused, but then said, "We all have depression. I have depression."
And then he turns to the nurse and asks if she has depression.
Yeah. For the source, this was a vivid, clear example of how these medical professionals normalize, invent, and perpetuate disease to ensure a continuous flow of patients and money.
It's the ultimate psychological crisis of confidence. The alleged betrayal is so deep. Doctors who are supposed to be objective experts are framed as actively creating and managing illness.
And that foundational belief that deception is the driving force leads him directly into his expanded critique of systemic corruption.
Right, so once the source becomes convinced that this exploitation isn't just about his one doctor, he really broadens his focus.
He does. Section 3 expands his critique to what he sees as widespread, coordinated corruption across the medical, religious, and even political fields.
And the language he uses to describe these doctors is scathing.
Wolves in sheep's clothing. He says they project this image of purity and integrity like a clean mountain from the outside, but their internal actions, he argues, are worse than murder or drug trafficking
Why worse?
because they ruthlessly exploit the trust of vulnerable patients.
And this exploitation, he alleges, relies on specific profit motives and mechanisms for faking results.
Yes, he claims that doctors actively coordinate with analysis labs and radiology centers to set financial ratios.
And the method is to show outright false results.
That's the allegation. Inventing tumors, liver issues, kidney problems, all to ensure continuous work and slowly drain the patient's money over time. The goal is to invent the need for repeated expensive checks and more consultations.
And he brings it back to the pharmacy link again here.
He does. He reiterates that if a doctor suggests taking a specific cheap drug from a specific pharmacy, it is, in his estimation, definitive proof of collusion.
The purpose being to dispense adulterated or counterfeit drugs, to keep the patient dependent, chronically ill, and always paying.
Exactly. And the consequence of these drugs, according to him, isn't just dependency, it's catastrophe. He argues the drugs actually enable the sickness to take hold.
So if a patient stops taking them abruptly,
They can be driven to suicide or self-harm because the sickness has been artificially entrenched and magnified by the medication. His personal account of becoming an automaton is his ultimate warning.
this systemic critique then requires him to completely redefine the nature of mental illness itself.
He has to. He maintains his core issue was just simple, brief fear and anxiety, which he attributes to self-whispering and minor demonic influence. He asserts it could have been solved easily and quickly.
But the drugs magnified it into something debilitating and prolonged.
So he lays out his own strict, precise methodology for what he sees as proper psychological treatment. In his view, you should start by treating only fear and obsession, OCD.
And high-dose drugs.
Should only be prescribed in extreme cases of total continuous loss of consciousness. The moment you see improvement, you must immediately and carefully withdraw the drugs.
He also has a very restrictive definition of true depression.
Extremely. He insists that true depression is very severe, continuous sadness. He says if a person can still smile or laugh at a joke, they do not have depression.
That rigid standard really highlights how absolute his distrust has become. Anything less than continuous despair must be a misdiagnosis or a result of pharmaceutical deception.
And that suspicion of deception just explodes outwards from the clinical realm. It extends to religious, financial, and societal fields.
He goes after non-traditional healers, right?
Yeah.
Herbalists and religious healers.
He does, accusing them of spreading ignorance. He rejects religious healing unless it's meticulously supported by a trusted person and a specific authentic hadith, a prophetic saying that clearly details the method. Anything else is just more fraud.
And public charities, too.
He accuses them of illicitly taking money, profiting from the public display of giving. He argues that the most virtuous charity is secret, private giving, and that all the public accounts just cause distraction and provide cover for fraud.
His warnings extend to religious figures themselves.
He advises extreme caution against anyone who makes religion overly complicated or simplifies it incorrectly or tries to make spiritual solutions exclusive to themselves. He rejects dream interpreters or people who use Quranic verses for financial gain. His advice is always to self-study the texts rigorously to avoid being misled.
Which feeds into his critique of the politicization of religion.
He sees deception on both extremes. On one hand, he criticizes those who enforce extremely strict mandates like mandatory beards, arguing this rigidity makes people hate Islam.
And on the other hand,
He criticizes those who deny fundamental concepts, like the mandatory nature of the hijab. Both extremes, for him, are just forms of deception designed to create confusion.
and finally, he touches on banking and the whole controversy over interest, or riba.
He questions the modern theological debate over whether banks are forbidden or permitted. He basically asserts that if there was any real divine doubt about it, God would have intervened and fought against everyone involved.
So the fact that the financial system persists, in his view, means the controversy is just another distraction perpetuated by deceivers.
These are major, major claims. We're talking about allegations of medical fraud, financial deception, manipulation of religious practice. But he doesn't stop there.
Not even close. And we should probably pause here to signal a really significant shift for the listener. The source moves from allegations of malpractice and fraud, which are at least legally testable, to fundamental denials of established science, physics, and global infrastructure. The level of skepticism just skyrockets in Section 4.
This is where we get into the alleged global illusions. And the core assertion is a monumental one.
He claims that most major displays of military and technological power are entirely fake. A phantom, or as he repeatedly calls it, fankouche.
Right. He argues that major weapon systems, we're talking nuclear missiles, satellites, intercontinental ballistic missiles, are predominantly illusions.
And they exist only to instill fear, maintain geopolitical control, and distract us from the real, hidden nature of global power.
This denial extends all the way to fundamental space technology. The source states, point blank, that satellites do not exist.
Which is a claim that requires us to understand his specific, if unconventional, evidence.
His evidence is this. He cites incidents where Egypt requested the launch of 3 satellites for peaceful uses, tracking climate, criminals, natural resources, only for those satellites to supposedly lose communication on multiple occasions.
So for him, that pattern of loss of communication is the obvious sign of deception. If they existed, they wouldn't just vanish over and over again.
Exactly. So his theory is that the signals we get on our TV dishes are actually coming from powerful terrestrial broadcasting stations like old aerials or antennas scattered across the Earth, not beamed down from space.
And this framework naturally leads him to dismiss all space-related narratives.
Of course. Missions to Mars, missions to the moon. He labels them all as elaborate hoaxes. Or, as he colorfully puts it, Indian films.
Theatrical, cinematic deceptions for public consumption and political control.
Right. And even high-altitude aircraft don't escape his skepticism. He asserts that planes flying very high are limited to just flying and releasing a white substance behind them, what most people would call contrails, and nothing more. He implies there's no sophisticated military or surveillance function up there, just superficial display.
The source then ties global political turmoil and even climate change into this grand narrative of deception.
And he often blends it with spiritual retribution. He claims the severe climate changes we saw between 2010 and 2017 were directly linked to the destruction of nuclear energy in 2010.
And how was this nuclear energy destroyed?
He asserts it was done by a small force, like a lightning strike or a thunderbolt, sent by God as punishment for oppression. He frames these complex global events not as accidents or scientific processes, but as direct divine judgment.
That period around 2010 is also significant for the Arab Spring.
Yes, and he argues that social media was initially exploited back then to incite chaos and revolutions in the Arab world. He believes the primary function of social media now is just to spread ignorance, immorality, and a lack of seriousness.
So his political advice is, therefore, extremely passive.
Listen to the news for information, pray for good outcomes, and that's it. He fundamentally rejects the idea of revolutions, viewing them as inevitable deception orchestrated by the deceivers to destabilize societies and seize control.
Finally, he brings this global deception full circle, back to his core expertise, the medical realm.
Where he alleges active biowarfare and disease manufacturing, he uses the example of hepatitis C in Egypt, which he claims was introduced through corrupted food or drugs.
And his controversial hypothesis is all about the role of treatment. He alleges that the diagnosis and treatment actually allowed the virus to take hold and persist.
He argues that without the interference of treatment, the patient might naturally recover, but the drugs ensure the virus takes root and becomes chronic.
And he sees modern epidemics as just a continuation of this calculated strategy.
After what he calls military failures in Iraq and Afghanistan, he alleges that biological warfare began. He cites SARS, avian and swine flu, Ebola, and corona.
The ultimate claim regarding these outbreaks is that most diseases are entirely an illusion.
Created by pharmaceutical companies and corrupt doctors for trade and profit. Simple fever or cold symptoms, he claims, are treated with deceptive drugs that cause all the symptoms of corona, leading to death not just from illness, but from the combined effects of poverty and deceptive treatment.
He even brings in an anecdote about a French woman curing her own breast cancer through prayer to reinforce his message that pharmaceuticals are unnecessary and harmful.
These claims, from denying ICBMs to saying diseases are manufactured illusions, they represent the logical endpoint for someone who has suffered such profound, prolonged trauma at the hands of those they were supposed to trust.
The only way to make sense of 15 years of intentional suffering is to conclude the deception is cosmic in scale.
Okay, so having laid out this vast, interconnected network of systemic deception, the source then pivots. He provides specific solutions for the individual who wants to escape what he calls the poison of modern life.
And these solutions focus heavily on natural and spiritual remedies for detoxification and healing.
The primary goal is clearly defined: to expel drug poisons and cure disease by returning to fundamental, spiritually sanctioned methods. And he establishes this clear regimen based on three main pillars.
3 pillars that he advises must be taken with every call to prayer or as needed throughout the day.
The first pillar is black seed, or Habit al-Baraka. The source advises taking a spoonful, and he cites a well-known hadith, a prophetic saying, that claims it's a cure for every disease. He says it works specifically to expel toxins, magic, and poison from the body.
Okay, what's the second pillar?
The second is dates, or tamar. He's very specific here, recommending 7 dates in the morning and then continuing to eat them throughout the day. This is also cited via a hadith as being effective in expelling poisons and magic.
And the third?
The third is honey. This one is cited directly from the Quran as a complete cure for all people. The consistent consumption of these 3 items, rooted in divine texts, combined with sincere prayer, is presented as the only true, safe path to healing.
A way to bypass the corrupt medical system entirely.
Exactly. And in addition to these 3 pillars, he puts great emphasis on water consumption. He advises drinking plenty of water, 1.5 to 2 liters daily, especially around the 5 prayer times, as the body's natural way to cleanse itself internally.
And he reassures the listener that, needing to use the restroom more is just a sign that the body is actively purifying itself from disease and toxins.
And the final, ultimate solution is purely spiritual: prayer and trust in God. He argues that once you have sincere faith, any earthly problem becomes simple because the world itself is meaningless in the grand scheme.
He even cites examples of non-Muslims who allegedly found cures through sincere prayer to prove its universal effectiveness over manufactured drugs.
Now, in this list of solutions, the source introduces a highly specific and very controversial view on the treatment of diabetes.
And we have to be clear here. This is a claim that moves sharply against established medical protocol, and we're just reporting it exactly as it's stated in the source.
Right. He argues that if a person's blood sugar is very high, or if they're in a diabetic coma, they should consume natural fruit, honey, or dates, along with plenty of water.
What's his logic there?
His logic is that this intake of natural glucose will actually reduce the level of what he calls industrial sugar in the blood. He points out that hospitals give glucose during a diabetic coma, so natural sources should do the same thing, but safely.
But he issues a severe warning against taking standard diabetes medication.
A very severe warning. He claims it actually enables the disease.
Mhm.
He says industrial insulin, in particular, makes the body react to even natural foods as if they were industrial sugar, which confuses the body's systems and raises blood sugar instead of regulating it.
And he's actively encouraging people to experiment with this.
He explicitly states that he's studying the possibility of stopping industrial insulin and encourages patients to try his natural remedy and report back on their results. He frames it as a necessary act of self-experimentation to escape the pharmaceutical deception.
Okay, so that brings us to his final warnings and takeaways, the things that really solidify the message of the whole document.
The foundational belief is reiterated one last time. Most diseases are an illusion, created and maintained solely for pharmaceutical trade.
And the actionable advice that flows from that belief is striking. He says, unless you have clear, verifiable symptoms, you should avoid analysis and radiology altogether.
Because he alleges most of the results are false, created specifically to ensnare the patient by falsely diagnosing serious issues like cancer or organ tumors, which then creates a need for lifelong treatment.
The source then delivers this final moral judgment. He calls these corrupt medical deceivers the most oppressive people from the time of Adam to the day of judgment.
That is a profound statement. He even claims they're worse than Pharaoh.
Because Pharaoh was an open oppressor, whereas these deceivers operate in secret, preying on fundamental human trust.
And for those who have suffered or died because of these drugs and corruption, especially those who committed suicide after being overwhelmed by the side effects of stopping the medication.
He grants them a high spiritual status. They are considered among the greatest martyrs because they succumb to a secret, invisible war.
And as a final, actionable religious piece of advice for the believer, to cleanse themselves from the influence of these deceivers and to cause their destruction, he advises reading 2 specific surahs from the Quran.
Surah Al-Shar, which is the relief, and Surah Al-Masad, the palm fiber.
And these are presented not just as spiritual acts, but as tools for defense and counteraction against this pervasive, invisible corruption.
So the critical necessity, the final takeaway, is awareness.
It's all about awareness. He tells the listener to recognize the exact characteristics of the deceivers, whether they're in medicine, religion, or finance. Their feigned love, their tendency to focus obsessively on flaws, and their faint, insincere smiles.
He insists that just knowing their traits is enough to render them harmless, like easily dismissed flies.
What an incredible journey we've taken through this testimony. I mean, it started with one man's 15-year psychological ordeal in a local clinic.
And it just spiraled out. It became this fundamental questioning of the entire global medical system, the integrity of finance and religion, and even the basic physics governing our world.
Absolutely. This document, and regardless of whether you accept his conclusions about satellites or biowarfare,
Right.
it serves as such a powerful illustration of the psychological fallout when trust and expertise completely collapses. Our user, the learner, is constantly faced with confusing, conflicting, and sometimes highly authoritative claims.
And this story just highlights the profound vulnerability that arises when you start to suspect the system itself is rigged against you.
The source's struggle is really a metaphor for navigating today's information landscape. When authority figures, doctors, scientists, religious leaders, politicians, are actively contradicting each other or are alleged to be working in this coordinated deception.
The individual is forced into a state of extreme radical skepticism.
A state where even easily verifiable facts become suspect. This deeply personal narrative shows the massive psychological cost of trying to navigate perceived systemic corruption.
So what does this all mean?
I think it speaks to the true price of trust. When deceit is alleged to be the default setting of the world, the search for truth becomes this solitary, high-stakes enterprise.
And the source needed to experience a monumental 15-year trauma just to realize he was being misled by one single doctor.
Exactly. And the author concluded His whole 15 years of suffering could be read and digested in less than 15 minutes.
Which leaves us with this final thought. If a lifetime of profound trauma can be distilled so quickly into a shocking, radical truth, what complex and painful truths are we failing to verify in the rapid-fire, overwhelming information we consume daily?
And how high is the shock required before we finally accept those truths? That's the question that really remains once you finish this deep dive.